how often do we hear these completely different narratives? How often has history been rewritten? I've been living and traveling around the world on my own for 20 years. And if there's anything I can take from the travel industry and from everything I've experienced so far, is that we've been fed lies and we've been fed half-truths. And there is so much history that we know absolutely nothing about. And that's what we're trying to do with our tours, to bring this history to light and to allow others to see this from a different perspective, and hopefully to plant a little seed, because that's all we ask for, to plant a little seed for you to go back home and start questioning things, but most importantly, educating yourself, reading more, interacting with other people more. And we've seen it among our guests, people who are curious but are not part of the humanitarian sector, who all of a sudden, after joining one of our tours, they go back home and they start calling out their families and their friends for having certain thoughts about different issues around the world.
Hey, it's Julia, and this is Going Places, a show about fascinating places near and far, and the people who make them better. Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is your host, Julia Denisyuk. Today we're speaking with a dynamic duo behind the Hybrid Tours, a travel company that uses the power of travel and storytelling to challenge stereotypes and foster connections with activists, refugees, and changemakers in places like Pakistan, Jordan, Armenia, and Georgia. The company was founded by Sibu Szymanowska and Hira Aftab after traveling to Jordan and Bosnia and Herzegovina, where they visited refugee camps and spoke to genocide survivors. Both of them have impressive backgrounds. Sibu is a human rights advocate, entrepreneur, and global citizen with 2 decades of working and living across 4 continents, who's been traveling full-time for the past 5 years. And Hira is a humanitarian expert who's worked in the British Red Cross, the European Union, and the United Nations, and co-founded Our World Too, an organization dedicated to rehumanizing the narrative surrounding refugees and displaced communities worldwide. With backgrounds like these and the focus on human rights and humanitarian issues, you'd think that this would be a serious conversation, and it is. But it is also very fun, we laugh a lot, and quite joyful. Indeed, I think you can hear the passion that both Hira and Sibu have for their work in their voices, and it was such a pleasure for me to connect with them. In this episode, we discuss how it happened that a Costa Rican Polish-American and a British Pakistani raised in Saudi Arabia started a travel company, how Hybrid Tours offers travel through a human rights lens, and how their work aims to debunk this very skewed view of the world in which 80% of travelers go to 20% of the world's places, and that's what we end up seeing on our feeds. We'll also talk about Sibu's epic trip going overland from West to North Africa, what traveling as a visibly Muslim woman is like for Hira, meeting the survivors of the partition in Pakistan and India, and what it's like being a travel content creator with a human rights lens. We're airing this episode on December 24th. Today, many people in the world will be celebrating Christmas. I hope you take some time this holiday season to rest, to experience joy, and to imagine what your life and the life of your community could look like next year. On the show, I asked Hira and Sibu how they would imagine the world if they could start from scratch, and I think you will like their answer. And before we begin, I want to remind you that I'm running a group trip to Jordan next June. On this trip, you'll get to see this country from the north to the south and do some truly incredible things, like practice calligraphy with a renowned artist who designed Jordan's new currency and study the ancient knowledge of navigating by the stars from a Bedouin man and my friend Ahmad Maraya, who learned from his grandmother. I've been to Jordan over 20 times, and nothing makes me happier than sharing my expertise and love for it with others. The 10-day trip runs from June 5th to 14th, 2026, and if you book your spot by January 5th, 2026, you'll be able to get in on the early bird pricing. The early bird deadline is coming up in just 2 weeks, so don't wait too long. Get all the information about this June trip, including the itinerary, what we will do and the price at goingplacesmedia.com/Jordan or check out the link in the show notes. All right, now on to our conversation with Hira and Sibu from the Hybrid Tours, and happy holidays. Dear Sibu, dear Hira, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have both of you on the podcast today.
So excited to be here. Thank you so much.
We are super honored to be here. We've been following your work for a really, really long time, actually, and I even had the opportunity to meet you in person earlier this year, which was pretty cool.
Yes, and shout out to Matt Bose, who is, I would say, my connector friend, because he always tells me, "Yeah, you should meet this person. You should meet this person. You should meet this person," because that's how you and I met, Sibu, right?
Yes.
So shout out to Matt. So there's a lot that I want to cover today. As I told you before we started recording, I really admire the work that you do both together but also separately. I think it's much needed in the world today. But first, I'm really curious to find out the origins of the path that you both are on right now. Because Hira, you founded Our World 2, an organization that's dedicated to rehumanizing the narrative about refugees and displaced communities. And Sibu, you are also a human rights advocate. So I'm just curious, where do the origins of this very justice and human rights oriented path through the world lie for each of you?
Honestly, I'm not sure there's any one starting point. It stems from like a lifetime, I guess, of experiences. And I grew up in the UK and Saudi, also in Pakistan. So, like, kind of constantly going between those cultures, learning about stereotypes, like experiencing how you were treated different. And then growing up in the West post 9/11 and seeing how I mean, I was 10 when it happened, kind of being then expected to represent an entire religion and having to explain things that are way beyond a 10-year-old's comprehension. Then learning more about the world and seeing how, like, brown and black kids are never too young to experience racism, but other kids from the global minority, I should say, are too young to learn about it. So I think growing up with that sense of, like, double standards and then also hearing about my grandmother's story, who was a refugee because of the partition of Pakistan and India, put me down this path. And then obviously later on, when I learned more about Palestine, that was, I guess, that kind of solidified my interest in learning about human rights and wanting to do something about the double standards in the world.
So you were in the US at some point in your childhood.
So now I was in the UK, but the rhetoric was exactly the same because CNN and BBC are unfortunately global.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I remember that time as well. I remember the headlines and the rhetoric and everything coming out of it. And it was just terrible to witness as somebody who is witnessing it from the outside, because at that point I wasn't really that involved in the community as I am now with my ties to Jordan and you know all the friends that I have there. And it's interesting to me because there's so many people who, and I just had this discussion with someone else on the podcast the other day, is that us immigrants, I think we almost have a double pressure. We have the pressure of fitting in into the place that we immigrated to or that our families immigrated to. And part of that pressure of fitting in is not speaking out, is staying quiet, is, you know, is not raising the profile. So I wonder if any of that played out for you as you were stepping into this very much human rights and justice oriented space.
So I think it definitely did. And I think a lot of diaspora kids have spoken about it. Like when your parents come over, your grandparents come over, they're very much concerned with survival and making it in the new environments they find themselves in. But then when you've studied there, when you've been brought up there, when you understand the mentality, you are now on an equal footing. So you have enough education, you have the language to fight back
Mm.
and to combat stereotypes, which are now, are dehumanizing. And I think we've even seen it with Palestine now that a lot of the tropes that came out after 9/11, a lot of people now just rejected them entirely, saying, we've been through this once, we're not going to do it again. So it definitely did.
And by the way, shout out to the background that you have. For those of our listeners who will listen this on the podcast and not on YouTube, you will not see it. But Hira has a beautiful. What would you call it? Like a, it's not a. It's not a flag.
I don't know, it's a scarf, and I actually got it in Palestine in 2016. So it's literally just been in my room since then.
Amazing. Hold that thought because I want to ask you about that trip. But Sibu, what about you? How did this path unfold for you and the journey that you're on now?
I think what's interesting is that Hira and I come from completely different backgrounds, and I grew up in the West, and yet, however, there are many different things that we experienced, our shared experiences, shared paths. And so my father was a refugee from communist Poland. He fled in the 70s and eventually got asylum in the United States. My mother was born and raised in Costa Rica, but she comes from a family of migrants. And so for me, this is an environment that I grew up in where I learned about the world and was exposed to different cultures. But I think something that impacted me personally was that from the age of 5, I remember clearly being bullied because of the person that I was, because of my lack of religious faith. So my parents decided to raise us in a very agnostic, secular environment, which goes completely against being Polish and Costa Rican at the same time. And so I had to experience a lot of bullying. And then in my teenage years, I experienced also a lot of discrimination in the different places that I grew up in. And that also translated to even to my late teens, early 20s. And so for me, it just made sense to not only obviously the sense of, I mean, it could go both ways, right? I could have built this sense of anger and resentment towards the world, which I did have for a while. But now that I'm older, I just see it as a path of compassion and trying to help others understand that we're really not that different from each other.
I love that. You know, one of the perks of being a podcast host is that you get to have conversations with so many people. And I think Hira, you have a podcast as well, and we'll link to it so our audience can check it out. And you'll probably relate to this, but you get to speak to so many people, and over time you start hearing, or you start seeing threads, and actually sometimes serendipitously the same conversation. Almost it's like you're having the same conversation over and over in different ways. Because what you just said, Sibu, is literally the conversation I had yesterday with another podcast guest, and it's about this idea that when we're young and we experience some of this discrimination, bullying, racism, we we don't have the language and the knowledge to understand how it's not about us. It's systemic issues that are just playing out in our lives. But then as as you learn and as you grow into this awareness, then you understand that it really wasn't about me. And I think that's also where that compassion comes from then, right? That you realize that girl that was bullied, she was experiencing this systemic issue. And then the question is, what do you do with that knowledge and how do you choose to incorporate that into your life, right? I think that's so beautiful. So, how do a Costa Rican Polish American and a British Pakistani raised in Saudi Arabia form a travel company together? How does that happen?
So obviously, we are both geeks, nerds. We love learning about the world. And somehow that took us to enrolling in a master's degree in the UK, which was a hybrid course. And that's where Hira and I met. So we were studying humanitarianism, conflict, and development. And it was just a fascinating course because it was a lot of it dealt with what is wrong with the humanitarian aid sector and different ways in which we can analyze it and not solve it per se, but just trying to see it from a different light because obviously it is a sector that is basically placed in a pedestal and nobody ever questions what is happening in the sector. And that is a lot of what we did in this course. But here I can talk a little bit more about the different steps and things that happened that led us to doing what we're doing today.
Yes, so fun story. You and I actually didn't speak the first time we met in Bath because I was like, "Oh, she's really nice, but she's really quiet." So I'm just gonna not say anything. But I think part of our degree was to go to Jordan actually, and we went to Jordan and we saw like different interventions where humanitarian organizations had quote unquote helped refugees. And some of them were actually really nice. So there's not a scathing review by any means. But we did go somewhere, which was Camp Azraq, and we saw where Syrian refugees were just tens of thousands of people living in the middle of the desert. And they were living not even in tents, they were living in what can only be called shelters made out of corrugated metal sheets in the middle of the desert. And so, if anyone who's lived in the desert, you know in summer, if you touch the seatbelt, you get burnt. So, imagine living in a house like that. So people were literally getting second and third degree burns when they were touching the walls. And largely Western engineers came and tried to cool down the housing. And I remember I questioned one of them and I was like, I basically asked them, like, I've seen some of what you've done here, but this isn't new. Like this, my grandparents had this in our house in Pakistan. So it's not exactly an innovation. It's just another thing. It's literally something from the global south. And I'm like, have you asked anyone in the camp what their opinions are, what their ideas are? And he's like, oh, all the good ones are gone. And I'm like, what do you mean the good ones are gone? And that kind of echoed like the immigrant, like the good and bad immigrant mentality. And literally that night, I think it was if I'm not wrong, in the lobby of a Movenpick hotel. I'm like, you know what? I have this idea. I'm going to tell the stories of refugees and displaced communities and show the people behind the headlines and the stereotypes. And that's how Our World 2 was born. And through that Jordan trip, I'm like, if we've seen where the humanitarian sector has done really well, let me put together another trip to Bosnia and Herzegovina to show my friends who I made through the master's program that where the humanitarian sector hadn't done as well. And we went to Bosnia because I'd been there the year before in 2018. So 2019 in August, we went again. And I wanted to show them how badly the UN had done during the Bosnian genocide, what had happened in the siege of Sarajevo, what had happened in Srebrenica. And we ended up going there and learning from survivors themselves. Um, and this was about 2019. So Sibu came on this trip. That's actually where we became friends. Then COVID happened and all the lockdowns happened. And I think it was literally right at the end of the last lockdown. And Sibu reaches out to me. She's like, Hira, I have an idea. Do you want to do it again? I'm like, what do you mean you want to do it again? She's like, the trip to Bosnia, should we do it again? And I'm like, you know what? This is a great idea because by then I was frustrated enough with the humanitarian sector and how little things seem to be changing. And you never really heard from refugees or displaced communities unless it was through the lens of getting more funding. And I'm like, why don't we just give or create a platform where they can tell their stories on their own terms and they don't need anyone else to define them? So that was the prequel to the hybrid tours.
What's really important about all of this is that I think something that has bonded us is our love for the world and our love for travel, and we grew up traveling. Like, it's ingrained just like you, Yulia, it's ingrained in you. It's not something that you chose for yourself, it's something that you were born and raised with. And so we, as avid travelers, we also saw that we, the three of us, are involved in the humanitarian sector, but what about everybody else who isn't? How do you get involved? And so we wanted to come up with a way in which regular people who have absolutely nothing to do with the sector could learn more about different issues and raise awareness about different issues on the ground. I think part of what we wanted to do was also, as avid travelers, we had never really seen the kind of experiences that we're offering now through the hybrid tours. And so when I took that trip with Hira, I like to think that I'm very well traveled. I had never done anything like that before. What I learned during those 8-10 days in Bosnia and Herzegovina was probably the equivalent of what we would have learned in the whole year of our master's degree. And most importantly, learning about different issues from people on the ground, that was completely priceless, because at the end of the day, when we're traveling, we're not going to remember facts. We will remember the stories and the encounters that we had. And so that's why that trip was completely life-changing, and it was a mind-blowing experience. And my background, well, I've been working on and off in the tourism sector for the last 20 years, almost 20 years, and also my background is in business development, so it just made sense for us to join forces and see what we could come up with, and here we are.
I love that. I love the origin story so much, and I want to get into the meat and potatoes of what hybrid tours offers in a second. But before we do, I just wanted to share with you because I think you might relate to this because of your work in Jordan and that initial trip that you went and did. My experience with looking at how the humanitarian world works happened when I met this woman in Jordan. Her name is Lama Khatib. She's an incredible person. She's co-founder of Al Barake wheat organization, and what they're doing is they're basically resurfacing, reviving ancient ways of growing wheat in Jordan. Because what I've learned is that Jordan, even though it's like the breadbasket, it's located in the Fertile Crescent, right? It's highly, highly dependent on US refined white wheat. Because in the 1970s, when the US food program was at its height, basically they flooded the market in Jordan with cheap US wheat that was cheaper than what the farmers that were growing their original ancient wheat strains in Jordan could ever produce and sell for. And so basically all the farmers were flooded out of the market. That knowledge was mostly lost on how to grow your own wheat. And for the past like 50 years, that's what Jordan has been eating. It's the US wheat from Ohio and from North Carolina and whatever. And then starting to pull at the threads of that US food program and what it was built for. It was built in the 1950s by JFK after the war. And the stated goals of the program were to help fight world hunger. But if you really look into it critically, it's really to help US farmers get their surplus crops out of their hands. And it continues to this day, right? The US government subsidies for the crop market is like a huge thing that actually nobody really talks about here in the state. It's not something that's common knowledge for people. But then those crops flooded the markets of places in the Middle East, of Africa, India, Asia, everywhere. Literally, that program is so widespread, and in a lot of cases, it's really decimated the local markets, local food knowledge, local food ways, and so it's just another way in which I think a colonizer mentality shows up in the world. That also is not something that we talk about. Like I was shocked when I learned that from Lama. That this happened in Jordan. And it's another example, I think, of how the humanitarian programs of the world can actually disrupt local communities rather than help them, right?
I actually haven't heard of it, so thank you so much for telling us. I will definitely read more about it, but then it really just feeds into a bigger issue of how colonizers came and destroyed indigenous knowledge because they wanted the resources and obviously then they wanted to flood the market with cheaper products.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I'm writing a book right now, and this is the chapter that I'm writing about Jordan, and that's what I'm writing about there. Basically, all the ways in which U.S. messes in the world and how it shows up in all these different countries. So yeah, I thought it was fascinating, and we'll link to some more facts about this on the show notes so you guys can learn about this food aid program and how it shows up in different places in the world. But let's talk a little bit about hybrid tours. So you guys have tours coming up next year to Pakistan, to Bosnia and Herzegovina, to Jordan actually, and to the Caucasus region. And like you already mentioned, I love that you have this focus on human rights because that's something that's most established, let's say, tour operators in the travel space ignore at best and pay lip service to at worst. Like there's a lot of people who like to talk about helping local communities, but oftentimes it's just lip service. So, what is an example of how you connect people who come on your trips to local activists, local change makers and refugee communities? And maybe choose one destination and tell me a little bit of what can people expect when they do that with you.
I think none of this would be possible. We're both humanitarians, but realistically speaking, none of this would be possible without Heroes organization, without our World
Mm,
Two, because that we have created a permanent partnership with them because we as a travel company cannot necessarily ensure that what we're doing is ethical and that we're not exploiting the people that we connect with and that we visit. And so that what's so important about the work that we're doing and to make sure that they're being heard on their terms, not specifically on ours. From a Cebu perspective, here I can talk more about our World 2 perspective. From a Cebu perspective, I think our messaging, our branding, but even like when you sign up for a Jordan tour, for example, you know this, Yulia. Maybe many of the listeners will not know this. More than half of the population in Jordan happens to be of Palestinian origin. And so for you to go to Jordan and not know that, but most importantly, not support that cause. So for example, when for every single one of our tours, we have disclaimers where, for example, for the Jordan tour, clear disclaimer, we will be meeting with refugees, you need to be respectful, etc. And most importantly, if you do not believe in the liberation of Palestine, this tour is not suitable for you. If you agree, please type yes. Yes. Armenia and Georgia, for example, Georgia is 20% of Georgia is occupied by Russia. And so we obviously do not care about people's nationality. Everybody's welcome, but we need to make sure that the people that we're meeting with are protected. And so if you support what Russia is doing at the moment, then obviously this tour is not suitable for you. And there will be plenty of other tours that might be more in tune with the way that you think and the way that you do things. And that's completely fine, but that is extremely important. And so these are little filters and little things that we have had to do in order to protect the people that we work with, basically, because they're our number one priority. Yes, of course, this is a for-profit establishment that we have going on here, but none of this would be possible without the people that we work with.
I think also just to pick up on what Sibu was saying, I think the biggest thing is you're not going to a country to meet the locals. You're going to meet equals. You're going to meet people from a country who are just living in a different country to you, a different context. This is not show and tell. These are real lives with real people. And when we meet, we want people to be respectful. We want them to be aware that there are different contexts in this world and to truly learn, because we wanted to create an equal environment where local communities also benefit from these tours. Because I think Zebu and me very early on decided that if, like, even the principle of do no harm in humanitarianism and even in medicine, if you're going in and the local community stops benefiting from you being there, stop going. It's literally that simple. Profits should never outweigh people's rights. We went to Pakistan recently and we introduced people to survivors of partition. And now these survivors are all in their 90s. And I had never heard a story directly from a partition survivor because my grandmother passed away before I could ask her. And we went into this village and we had these guests with us and we had these three men who came and they were so confused. They were like, you want to hear our stories? And they're like, why? And we're like, oh, because we want to know what happened in Pakistan and India. We want to know what colonization did. And they were like, no one has ever asked us these stories before. And he's like, we're 90 years old. And they were talking about how they had to leave India and how Muslims and Sikhs started killing each other, but then how there was also solidarity in the fact that some Muslims sometimes protected the Sikhs, sometimes Sikhs protected the Muslims. And it was a whole viewpoint that one of our friends from their local partners, he said these people lived in his village and he didn't even know these stories because no one asks. No one asks these stories. No one asks about this. And then in Bosnia, we met with Emir Hajdarovic, and he is the president for the former concentration camp inmates in Mostar. And he was saying that like 30 years have passed since since the end of the Bosnian genocide, and their cases still haven't been heard. And more than half of the inmates have already passed away. And the ones that are alive now were much younger when they went into these concentration camps, and these still haven't been heard. So these war criminals are walking around, the Croat and Serb nationalists, going about their day in Bosnia while their victims are literally having to live in the same neighborhoods as them. And it's these kind of perspectives that you can't learn from textbooks. And that's really what we wanted to do when we created the hybrid tours. Have that kind of learning opportunity and moments of connection for not only our guests, but also the people we meet.
Man, this is so powerful. I want to come to one of your trips now.
Thank you.
Because this is not, like you said, this is not common at all. At all, right? Like I was telling Hira before we recorded, I had an experience in Jordan with one of two big travel companies in the world. You can guess which one is that. Their brand is all about community and purpose and purposeful, meaningful travel.
I think I saw your stories.
The whole time we're in Jordan, there is zero acknowledgement of what's happening next door. We are having parties, there's food everywhere. And what really upset me that it was a gathering of 700 travel industry leaders. So it's opinion makers, it's journalists, it's hotel CEOs, it's content creators, tour agencies, travel agencies. And so all these people are coming to Jordan to celebrate purposeful travel and community tourism and having zero conversation acknowledgement, at least something. Give me something at least. Nothing. And then I had an opportunity to talk to the CEO one-on-one, and I asked him, like, how do you do this? How do you bring people to this country when there is genocide next door?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, Julia. I'm sure that wasn't easy. I'm sure that wasn't easy.
Actually, no. By that point, I was so upset that I. It was very easy. It was very easy. But he, of course, gave me a BS corporate answer. You know, he had to
Yeah.
serve all the people in his community, and he doesn't want to upset
Diplomatic spiel.
anyone. Exactly, but it's exactly that, right? Like, how do you come to the place and are completely oblivious to its history, its politics, what people are going through. That's why we need more companies, more organizations like you guys doing this work, because that's how I think we raise our collective awareness and raise our collective humanity, I would say.
I've had that same conversation in the humanitarian sector. Now, you imagine the biggest organization you can think of in the humanitarian sector, and we're in an all staff call. And now, this wasn't just me, it was also my friend, so I can't take full credit for this. 900 people.
Wow.
In when October 7th happened, they didn't even mention Palestine. They didn't even say occupied territories. They just said Israel. Said it once. They said it twice. They said it the third time. The third time on Zoom, and we literally started writing "and Palestine," and the woman looked
Oof.
visibly
Mm-mm.
annoyed. She was like, "And the Palestinian occupied territories," and I'm like, "Why are you humanitarian if you don't know anything about history?" And the witch hunt that happened in that organization after the 7th of October, anyone who was pro Palestinian was basically forced out. People on literal permanent contracts were made redundant, and people on fixed term contracts who hadn't said anything were made permanent. It was shambolic.
That's that's
Yeah.
I don't know why it still shocks me, to be honest, because it's like it shouldn't at this point, because I mean we know all the prosecution that happens, and but it's still like it still shocks me. It shocks me to this day.
But that's why it's so important to just basically bring different narratives, and it's important to basically decolonize travel, right? Just today, we were creating a reel. I don't know if you saw this. There was a huge discovery. A man breaks down. He is in the middle of a forest, and he's breaking down and crying because after 13 years, a biologist, an Indonesian biologist, found a flower he'd been looking for 13 years. 13 years, the tears, the excitement, you could feel everything through that video. And then what? Of course, Oxford University was part of the study as well. They put it up on social media, and it's like, oh, yes, this Western biologist. And I was like, excuse me? What about the team on the ground? The people who had been there for more than 10 years trying to find this flower? What about the local biologists? Nothing. That's literally the video we're
Wow.
making. And so, why? Because it's how often do we hear like these completely different narratives? How often has history been rewritten? We don't know that, and so it's so important, and if there's anything I've taken from I've been living and travel me personally, I've been living and traveling around the world on my own for 20 years, and if there's anything I can take from the travel industry and from everything I've experienced so far is that we've been fed lies and we've been fed half truths, and there is so much history that we know absolutely nothing about, and that's what we're trying to do with our tours, to bring this history to light and to allow others to see this from a different perspective, and hopefully to plant a little seed, because that's all we ask for, to plant a little seed for you to go back home and start questioning things, but most importantly educating yourself, reading more, interacting with other people more, and eventually, and we've seen it among our guests, two people who are not part of the humanitarian sector, who all of a sudden after joining one of our tours, they go back home and they start calling out their families and their friends for having certain thoughts about different issues around the world. That is what we want basically through our tours, because it's not just the locals benefiting, it's the people who join us as well.
I love that, Siba. I love the passion that you carry for this. Obviously, I think all three of us are very passionate about this. There is a woman that you guys need to know, by the way. Her name is Muna Haddad. She's incredible. Maybe you already know her. She runs Baraka Destinations in Jordan. She's such a rebel and fighter and just an incredible person. Shout out to you, Muna. And something that she said, I was traveling with her. That was one good thing that came out of this thing that I had in Jordan now, because I was traveling with her in her Baraka destination. And she said something so brilliant. She's like, who gets to tell the story of a place? Most often it's not the people who are there and who are the custodians of the place and the custodians of the story, right? When you go with a big travel company, it's through that lens, that western, that colonial lens, is how you get to experience that place, even if there is community component, even if there is engagement with local community. The dynamics, the power dynamics of it are such that it's not the people who are the custodians who are telling you the story most of the time. And so that's why, again, I feel so passionate about what you guys are doing, because I think you understand that so well because of your own background and orientation, that and what you said here about, we don't come there to meet the locals. By the way, I hate that word, the locals. I never use it in any of my writing. 'Cause to me, it's kind of feels like, oh, I'm here to see the locals. The locals is almost like the animals in the zoo. You're there to meet equals. I love how you said that. So yeah, I mean, 100% aligned with what you guys are saying. And yeah, I think you should know Muna Haddad. Shout out to her. We'll link to her work in the show notes so everyone can check out Baraka destinations as well. But I want to switch gears a little bit because we still have a lot to cover, and there's it feels like we need to come back for part two also, because there's so much. But I want to talk a bit now about your own experiences moving through the world, right? So you have hybrid tours, you then have Hira, you have Our World 2, and Sibu, you have your own storytelling platform. And I invite everyone to check out hybrid tours and the upcoming trips that you guys have. We'll link to it in the show notes. But I'm really interested in learning more about your own experiences. Hira, you've posted on your Instagram about your experience traveling as a visibly Muslim woman. And so I just wonder if you wanted to share a couple of thoughts on that, because I think a lot of our listeners would love to learn about that as well.
So honestly, never really sure how to answer this because there are multiple layers to traveling as a hijabi, for example. And I know some people get flagged or some people get stopped, maybe because of the work they do, or maybe the way they look, or maybe their names, because we know there is a whole list of interesting people that get stopped. But I honestly, maybe because I've been wearing hijab for like 2 decades now, I don't know if I notice it as much, but I remember very distinctly when after Bosnia, when we went with everyone in August 2019, Sibu actually had to leave early, so she didn't join us in Croatia. But when we went to Croatia, I didn't clock this at all. My friends did though. So we were walking around. I was the only hijabi in the group. We kind of went to this restaurant, and there was clearly spaces in this restaurant. But then when they asked if they had any tables free, they're like, "Oh, we don't have any." And I was like, "Okay, like whatever. I don't care." Like I wasn't really paying as much attention. But afterwards, my friend turns around to me and goes, "Oh, like it's because you wear hijab. Did you not realize that?" I'm like, honestly, I didn't. I don't know if it's just because I worn hijab for so long, or because I've experienced racism for wearing the discrimination, I should say, for wearing the hijab from Muslim and non-Muslim communities. So it's like this interesting experience I've had, but also there's a privilege in how you speak and there's a privilege in how you look. If you speak like you're well educated, you're less likely to be profiled. I'm going to say it straight. And also, if you're white skinned, light skinned, European passing, or white passing, you're not going to get profiled the same way as someone who looks more traditionally South Asian or black. Because when you put all of those combinations together, that intersectionality of racism plays out very differently for hijabis. So a black hijabi will never, ever have the same experiences I will have, or the same experiences being like less surveillance, if you want to call it that, and I won't have her experiences. There's like a multifaceted layer of traveling when wearing hijab. So that's like when people say, "Oh, can you talk about your experience?" I'm like, I can talk about mine, but then I always add this disclaimer of saying, like, never take my one experience of me as a person as being a catch-all for all hijabis because it wouldn't work.
I love how you talk about it, because what it reminds me of is also another conversation I just had for the podcast with Dr. Anu Taranath, who is the author of Beyond Guilt Trip, Mindful Travel in an Unequal World, which is an incredible book. I recommend it to anyone. And in there, she talks about this idea of the mythical norm. And the mythical norm is basically the identity with the highest privileges in the world, right? So it's a white male from the West, basically. That's the kind of the mythical norm. And then she talks about how the farther you are away from that mythical norm, the more experience of discrimination and racism you experience. So we all have that intersectionality that you talk about, right? We all have, like, as a woman, you experience it differently than as a man, as a light skin versus dark skin, like, and so all these layers. But I thought it was so helpful to think about it in terms of that mythical norm concept, and then how far away you are from that mythical norm, right? No, that's really brilliant. And it's interesting that I often think about how um I do want to believe that people are fundamentally good, and that it's more about their exposure to something different from them, because and that's, I think, perhaps we share this belief that that's why travel is so powerful, because the more you expose yourself to things and people and places that are so different from you, you then actually start seeing, oh, actually they're not threatening, and they're not even that different, actually, beyond all those external markers, right? And so people in Croatia probably haven't experienced that so much. And then on top of that, they haven't met anyone wearing a hijab, but then they've heard the headlines and they've heard the rhetoric about Muslim people, right?
During the Bosnian genocide, Croat nationalists actually wanted to make Greater Croatia and Greater Serbia respective. So there is history there where the concentration camps in Mostar and most of some of Herzegovina were actually run by Croat nationalists. So there is residual mentality from then. And even if you go to Mostar, for example, there's a clear divide. There's a road that runs through Mostar, dividing East and West Mostar. So the East Mostar is where the historic center is. That's all Muslim, basically. And if you go to the west side, that's more Catholic. That's where the Croats are. So there is still a very big divide in Bosnia. If that was this particular situation, I don't know, or maybe he just doesn't like Muslims in general. But I did want to caveat that there is history there.
Actually, that's an excellent point here, because also that's a history that's been erased from European storytelling and narrative, because I've actually this season is congregating around this one topic, because another guest I have on the podcast is Tariq Hussein, who just wrote a book called Muslim Europe, where he resurrects some of that very lost stories and history. Because again, like when we think of Europe, we don't think of Europe that for 1400 years had a Muslim and Arab thriving civilization and community that actually influenced in a lot of ways
Yeah.
the Renaissance of the European Middle Ages and all of that. And he also wrote a book about the Balkan history of Islam, minarets in the mountains,
Yeah.
which is exactly what you're talking about here with Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I stand corrected on what I said. I mean, I still do think that part of it is that idea of I've never experienced something other than me. That's, I think, separate probably from the nationalism issue that you're talking about. But yeah, I mean, that's why travel is so powerful. We just have to keep exposing ourselves to people.
I think it's fascinating because when we're together and then people actually say it out loud. They're like, "Oh, you're so different from what I thought you were." And they say this to Hira, and I'm standing there in the room and I'm like, "How is she different?" Well, she's not like a regular hijabi, and I'm like, have you met any hijabis? Do you have any hijabi friends?" And they're silent, and they're like, "Well, no." And I'm like, "So how would you know?" It's just like this idea of what a person is meant to be like simply because they choose a certain way to follow their religion. But I think that's just fascinating to me. It always has been. And Kira and I have worked in a number of projects in and outside of the hybrid tours. And again, for me, I think it's really important for people to just have the chance. This was years ago. Hira helped me with a project where I was giving workshops in Polish high schools about Polish migration, because obviously Poland in itself is a very homogenous country. And so, me being half Polish, I wanted to go in and speak to them about how Polish have always migrated, and how if you ask any Polish person, and I asked them, how many of you actually know someone who's living abroad? Every single person in that room raised their hands, and yet they're against migrants, right? So I also wanted them to have the opportunity to speak to Hira, and they did. And I mean, they were shy and they're high school students, but Hira was able to just speak to them and tell them about her experience and all the different things that she does, whether that's, K-pop and lifting and all these different things. She's just any other person like you and I. She just
Of course.
happens to wear a headscarf. That's the only difference, really.
Yeah. And how powerful it is when you really feel that deeply, innately, through exposure again to other people. I think our world would be a much, much gentler place if we all had the opportunity to do that, to be exposed to each other. And that's actually something that I also think about a lot often, because I think part of why we're seeing so much strife and hate and anger and all these terrible things is that we have lost so many opportunities and spaces to be together, to just be together with other people. We're so isolated now, and um yeah, but that's a conversation for a whole other for a whole other episode. We'll come back for that next time. uh, so I wanted to ask you, actually, you're also currently posting on Instagram, which we'll also link to. We'll link to both Sibu and Hira. Definitely follow both of them and their work. You are currently posting a series of what it's like traveling overland from West to North Africa as you were headed to Cote d'Ivoire. And I love that you are, with your work, debunking this very, very skewed view of the world. Because I think somewhere in your post, you're saying that 80% of world travelers stick to 20% of the world
Yes.
and keep coming back to the same places. And we keep sort of seeing this regurgitated content from the same areas over and over again, while the rest of the much beautiful and diverse and incredible world really gets, like, it's non-existent basically on our feeds. And so I just love that you're debunking this view. So tell us a bit about that. What was it like going overland from West to North Africa? What Cote d'Ivoire was like, and some of your experiences there?
It was very interesting because so I'm a content creator, and the way other content creators, and they do this for clickbait, they do this for attention, and it's usually white men that do this, where they go to West Africa and they travel to West Africa and they're like, it's dangerous, it's horrible, it's corrupt, it's this, it's that. I've been hearing about this for years. And for years, I've been dying and dying to go to West Africa. And I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified because everything that I see, because we don't really get to see a lot of content from West Africa. And if we do, it's from Senegal, the Gambia, and Ghana, which are the three main countries, right, that people visit, the three most touristy ones. I was terrified and I was like, you know what? No, I'm going to do a little bit of research. And so I did. And like every other place in the world, I knew that there had to be something wrong with what everybody was saying, but again, I was terrified. This was by far the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life, especially from a solo female travel perspective, and I wanted to see it for myself, and it was a life-changing experience, but also for me, I love traveling by land, which I know is crazy, but I've done over 50 land border crossings throughout my life, a lot of them on my own. And so for me, it's also important to showcase the world from a solo female travel lens. And I also want to add that, yes, I do have passport privilege through my father, but I was still mostly born and raised in Costa Rica. I identify as a person of color. I was raised in the global south for the most part, and so I don't see people like myself out and about traveling. And in West Africa, where there were very, very few travelers, and then if there were, of course, they were from very specific countries, and 95% of them were male. So I just wanted to see this from a different perspective, and it was a wonderful trip. Wonderful. And nothing, like, it just completely restored my faith in humanity. But most importantly, I want to say, was there corruption and bribes and this and that? Yes, but it was nowhere near as bad as people said it was. It was much safer than people gave it credit for. Again, I'm not saying this is like a trip that is meant to be for, people who are just beginning their travel journey. Definitely not. It's taken me years to get to this point. However, the only thing that happened to me was in the airport, because I would travel by land for about 2.5, 3 months. In the airport, when I finally made it to my last destination in Morocco, I got ripped off by a man in the airport when I was exchanging money. That was literally the only thing that happened to me. A man in the airport ripping me off by like $5. That was the worst thing that happened to me during my trip.
Wow. I love that. I love that. Which countries did you go to?
I started in Cote d'Ivoire, so Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia. Then I made my way from Liberia to Sierra Leone, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, the Gambia, Mauritania, and then I finished off in Western Sahara.
Amazing. Wow, amazing trip. I can't wait to see all that you've seen there on your feed.
It was great to just see these places for myself and see what it was really like. It's a difficult region to travel in. I understand why there isn't as much tourism. I truly do, and that's what I'm trying to showcase as well. But something that I also do through content is that I think, and I've also here and I have spoken about this, I think if I were a content creator 10 years ago, I think my content would probably be very different from what it is right now. I'm wiser, I'm older, but also I have this certain lens from the world, and I think my educational background plays a huge, huge role in the way that I make content as well. Like, I always try to bring human rights into everything that I do, and I do it in a casual way because I don't wanna overwhelm people. It still is a travel page after all, but I want people to learn as well while they're consuming my content. That's all I hope for.
And you do it so well. I loved some of your stories that you posted about Iraq, for example, and some of the stolen artifacts that are still in Britain and all of that. So, yeah, you're doing a great job with that. I mean, I had a similar experience in West Africa. I went to Sierra Leone a year and a half ago now. And I think one of the most important things we can do for ourselves is recognize when we are being impacted by the narratives and by all the stories we see in the media before we actually go somewhere and experience it for ourselves. Like having that awareness of how our media environment impacts us and how the stories that we hear throughout our lives, how they impact us is so powerful and so important. Because I even recognize that in myself, like and even now you were saying, oh, I went to Liberia, I went to and I'm like, "Ooh, she went to those places." And then I'm, like, checking myself, like, "Why are you having this reaction right now?" You know what I mean? It's like that awareness
It
of
happens.
exactly. So, I mean, that's incredible. I can't wait to sit down and have, like, an in-person chat with you girls and just talk about all this stuff. But I wanted to ask you, Sibu, you've been traveling full time for, I think, over 5 years now, and the question that I have for you is, are you tired?
100%. I'm exhausted, but I don't look. I as we have all we identify with multiple cultures. We've been raised in multiple places. Is there such a thing as home, right? That is, I think, the eternal struggle, and I know you love Chicago. We talked about this in person. I don't know if Chicago feel well, no, you
Where
said
did you get that information?
that last time when we were meeting up, and you said it was the one place in the US where you could live.
Huh? I said that? Are you sure?
Yeah, did I get it wrong? Well, any what was that no, I think I don't know if there's such a thing as choosing a base or choosing a home, and maybe I'm just really stubborn, but then I also think about the fact that, humans were nomadic once upon a
Yeah.
time. Maybe I can live the modern life, 1, 2 bases, and live out of those 2 bases and then travel. I don't know. I'm experimenting with different things right now. Let's see where that goes, but I think I'm completely in peace now with the fact that I might not find that home ever, and that's okay because I think home at the end of the day, and I'm sure you both agree with this, home is people, and people are
Yeah.
scattered all over the world, and so it's hard to get everybody together in the same places, so it is what it is.
I resonate with that a lot because I've been in the States for 25 years now. I've never felt like I belong here. I never felt like I truly have a home here. And lately, in the past maybe 5 years, I've come to a realization that for me, home is where there are people I love. And that's multiple places around the world. And so yeah, I resonate with that quite a lot. What about you, Hira?
No, I 100% agree because my family is across the world as well. Any of my siblings, I think at any one time, my family are on 3 separate continents.
Same here.
Is everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
Well, that's why I think we have this very, I would say, generous orientation towards the world too, and seeing the humanity and being passionate about the rights of human beings. Because when you have this sort of, at least I've always felt that, like when you have that global awareness, really is what it is,
Yeah.
being able to see people and love people and know people in different places around the world, I think it does something to your psyche. It really opens you up, you know? We are airing this episode at the end of the year. And the end of the year, at least for me, I try to make it sort of a hopeful place, a place where you can maybe reflect a little bit on the year and also dream a little bit about the year ahead. So I want to ask you both this question now because we're at the end of the year. I want to dream a little bit and ask you if we could start over in the world. If you could start over in the world, or like say, I'm creating the world from scratch. What would you like to see in it?
That is an interesting question.
I have an answer. It goes back to what you were saying, Yulia. The reason we show compassion towards the world, it's because we have been engaging and connecting, and we have encountered people who are completely different from us. Not because we wanted to, but simply because those were the environments that we were raised in, and look at the effects that it has had. And I think most of the people that I get along with extremely well are people that have never truly felt at home or feel like they just simply belong to the world, right? And so for if there's anything I could wish for is for people to just make an effort to interact with people that are different from them, whether that's different race, different religious background, different ethnicity, different place of origin. And that's why travel heals, right? Because it's forcing us to be with people that are completely different from us.
Beautiful. Beautiful answer.
So mine, I don't know, maybe I have two. One to stop British colonialism before it begins. The second, just end it. Just end it. All colonialism needs to go. But then maybe maybe the longer answer is I don't know if it's a cynic in me or because I've been in the humanitarian sector so long. I think good and bad will always exist. Whether we go back and start from the beginning or we start again from now. I just wish everyone was allowed to live with the same nuances and grace given to the global north and to white people. If good and bad can exist in the global north, if it's one man who was a great family guy who never harmed a fly but killed his entire family can be portrayed like that, and if Germany and the UK, with their colonial, blood-filled, blood-stained history, can get a global pass for being an amazing country, then why can't Pakistan, for example? Why can't Saudi Arabia be discussed with the same nuance and the same lens that the global north is discussed in? So I would want that to be so everyone can exist with nuance and not just have a black and white narrative for the global south while the global north can get away with literal genocide and get away with it.
Yeah. Mic drop, Hira, mic drop. You nailed it. You really nailed it. Well, girls, I would love to continue talking to you. It seems like we have a lot more that we could cover, and there's a lot of other things actually that we didn't even get to. So I do think we need to do a part two of this conversation, maybe sometime in the new year, and check in with you again. But I want to close with something that I often close our conversations, and that's two questions. One, what gives you hope as you look into the year ahead? And then where are you going to next?
What gives me hope over and over again is interacting with people like yourselves. There we are out there. We are out there, and maybe some of them don't necessarily have an online platform, maybe some of them are not active and vocal online, but there are so many. I do believe the world is inherently good. I do, and that's something that travel has taught me over and over again, and so it's just hoping to continue connecting with people who actually care and who actually do believe in making a difference.
Beautiful. Hira, what about you?
I think it's the people. It's the people we connect with. It's the people we've met on our trips. It's the people I have interviewed through our world too. It's friends like Sibu and now Yulia, and also everyone I kind of connect with because sometimes it feels like you're operating in a world that's essentially just trying to silence you at all times. But when you have people who are on the same mission as you, it gives you hope and courage to keep going.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I'm very glad that I've met both of you. And here, I hope to meet you in person also. I met Sibu in person. So now we need to do like a three people reunion or something like that. Somewhere fabulous in the world, in Liberia or West Africa somewhere.
Or Jordan, or
Or
Jordan.
Jordan.
Or Jordan. Or Jordan. Yes, absolutely. So where are you guys traveling to next?
I'm staying put for a while, which is quite a change for me. I haven't really announced this on social media, and I don't think I want to. I think this is just something that I'm keeping for myself. I am currently in Vietnam, and I just signed a lease for a few months, which is something I haven't done in years. And by years, I mean like more than 5 years. And I just wanted to relax and try out what it's like being a normal human being with a routine and places to go to. And just before I met up with you two, there was a little reunion here where a bunch of people met up for dinner. Just the little things that we tend to take for granted because we're just so focused on traveling and seeing the world. And I'd forgotten what this felt like. And I just came from a trip here, and I, through the hybrid tours, we were just invited by the Ministry of Tourism in Indonesia to engage with them and learn more about their ethical and regenerative tourism initiatives. And I didn't travel with all of my things, which is what I normally do. I left everything here and I traveled with a duffel bag. And then I came back last night and I was like, wait, this is my bed? This is my apartment? All of my things were here? I was like, this is mind blowing. I've forgotten what this felt like. So, unless it's for work, I'll be here for a while. But yeah, starting next year, we do have a couple of work trips coming up and then a few hybrid tours. We don't necessarily always join all of them, but some of them we do. So yeah, that's what's happening in the first half of the year at least.
Well, congrats, Sibu. Enjoy your period of staying in one place for a while.
Thank you. Thank you.
What about you, Hira? Where are you headed to next?
I am actually headed to Canada and the US because my brother and sister live there respectively. And I also now have an 8-month-old niece that I haven't spent much time with. So I'm excited about that.
Well, on that lovely note, girls, wonderful to meet you. And I hope to meet you in person. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing in the world and the stories that you're sharing. I think it's critically needed in the world right now. And I'm very happy to have connected with you and spend this time with you and hope not the last time.
It definitely won't be. Matt Balls, thank you for being a connector. And Yulia, thank you for having us. And thank you for all the amazing work that you do. It is truly, truly inspiring.
It is. We absolutely love your work and it was incredible to meet you. And I hope we get to meet in person soon. And thank you, Matt, as well.
Going Places shares stories that help us imagine a better way to live, create, and travel. We are located on the traditional unceded Anishinaabe homelands. Our theme music is Altercations by Matt Nicholson at Big Score Audio. Our editor is Luciana Boss. We are an audience-supported platform. Become a member and get our awesome perks at goingplacesmedia.com. Our founding members are Rise Travel Institute, a nonprofit with a mission to create a more just and equitable world through travel education, and Radostina Boseva, a film photographer with an editorial flair based in San Francisco. Take care and safe travels.